Welcome back to An Anthropologist and a Cat Discuss Judith Butler. Today we're covering Chapter 2 of Undoing Gender. Yay! Okay, so Chapter 2 is Gender Regulations. This is not as fun as Chapter 4, but that's 2 videos from now. Okay, so basically this entire chapter, Butler is talking about gender is a norm. I'm pretty sure she says, but if gender is a norm, at least 8 times. I'm not going to count them because I'm not CinemaSins. So, a norm, I'll give you Butler's definition of a norm. A norm is not the same as a rule, and it is not the same as a law. A norm operates within social practices as the implicit standard of normalization. Although the norm may be analytically separable from the practices in which it is embedded, it may also prove to be recalcitrant to any effort to decontextualize its operation. For gender to be a norm suggests that it is always and only tenuously embodied by any particular social actor. And then we're just going to give you the other gender is a norm statements. To claim that gender is a norm is not quite the same as saying there are normative views of femininity and masculinity, even though there clearly are such normative views. Gender is the apparatus by which the production and normalization of masculine and feminine take place, along with the interstitial, we're going with that, forms of hormonal, chromosomal, psychic, and performative that gender assumes. So, it gets restrictive, there's a binary, we know all of this. This is when it gets good. A restrictive discourse on gender that insists on the binary of man and woman as the exclusive way to understand the gender field performs a regulatory operation of power that naturalizes the hegemonic instance and forecloses the thinkability of its disruption, which then goes on that gender studies has assumed that the alternative to the binary system is a multiplication of genders, which brings the question, how many genders can there be and what will they be called? Thing with that, gender is a social construct, and there are societies who have way more than 2 genders. Like, I have, yeah. That's a thing, y'all. Other approaches, and there's references, our good buddy Lacan again, and goes on, other approaches insist that transgender is not exactly a third gender, but a mode of passage between genders, an interstitial and transitional figure of gender that is not reducible to the normative insistence on 1 or 2. We get into trans embodiment and all that good stuff in Chapter 3. So, damn, I'm good. I just opened right to where I left off. Go me. High five. Alright, so, brings in psychoanalytic thinking and structuralist legacy within that exerted a monumental effect on feminist film and literary theory, as well as feminist approaches to psychoanalysis. I can't pronounce things today. Through the disciplines. It also paved the way for a queer critique of feminism that has had, and continues to have, inevitably divisive and consequential effects within sexuality and gender studies. Thank you, queer theory. You're doing the thing that you've been telling me all semester that you do. Also, thank you, Judith Butler, for being one of the founding people in queer theory. go you. Okay, so then we start talking about the incest taboo, which we could have a whole other video of that. But lucky for us, it's pretty much this entire chapter. So, apparently Claude Lévi-Strauss makes it clear in The Elementary Structures of Kinship that nothing in biology necessitates the incest taboo, that it is purely a cultural phenomenon. Inbreeding? That's actually exactly what I wrote, because, I mean, isn't that the entirety of why a bunch of royal families got all wonky looking? I have to disagree with Lévi-Strauss on this. There's a reason for the incest taboo. I mean, granted, well, no, maybe not. I mean, it's, with the exception of certain, ancient societies, cough, ancient Egypt, cough, cough, we've tried not to marry our siblings, or first cousins. Okay. Royal family is not counted in this because royal families are royal families. But again, we've seen what happens when you inbreed. I think that'd be justification for the incest taboo in and of itself. So, I mean, okay. So the taboo itself is a cultural phenomenon, but biology kind of backs it up. Again, I mean, if you want your kids to have a ridiculous underbite and, tentacles, I mean, go for it, but, I mean, come on. Alright, so, and then, but we had bicultural. Lévi-Strauss does not mean culturally variable or contingent, but rather according to universal laws of culture. See my discussion of the last 2 minutes. Thus, for Lévi-Strauss, cultural rules are not alterable rules, as Gail Rubin subsequently argued, but are inalterable and universal. Again, see my point of 3 minutes ago. This stuff's altered through time. Sorry about that. I'm not editing that out because Indiana Jones. In Lacan, let's talk about our dear buddy Lacan again. That which is universal in culture is understood to be its symbolic or linguistic rules, and these are understood to support kinship relations. In Lacan, the symbolic becomes defined in terms of a conception of linguistic structures that are irreducible to the social forms that language takes. Hence, a norm is not quite the same as symbolic position in the Lacanian sense, which appears to enjoy a quasi-timeless character regardless of the qualifications offered in endnotes to several of Lacan's seminars. The Lacanian view insists that there is an ideal and unconscious demand that is made upon social life which remains irreducible to socially legible causes and effects. Okay. Okay. Alright. Here's a part where I have lots of margin notes. Those are the words I want. What is offered by structuralism is a position within language or kinship that is not the same as a norm. For the latter is a socially produced and variable framework. Moreover, if a symbolic position is more appropriately regarded as a norm, then a symbolic position is not the same as itself, but is rather a contingent norm whose contingency has been covered over by a theoretical reification that bears potentially stark consequences for gendered life. And now I realize my margin note was basically just consolidating that. If symbol is a norm, then contingent on philosophy that could be bad for gender. That's exactly what it said. So, then we get into something that doesn't explicitly reference Kafka, but it references Kafka. It is the law becomes the utterance that performatively attributes the very force to the law that the law itself is said to exercise. It is the law as thus a sign of allegiance to the law, a sign of desire for the law to be the indisputable law, a theological impulse within the theory of psychoanalysis that seeks to put out of play any criticism of the symbolic father, the law of psychoanalysis itself. Kafka. Because the law is only the law because it gives power to itself. Okay, and then here's a quote I really like because it kind of brings the whole social political mess into context a little bit. If there is a law that we cannot displace, but which we seek through imaginary means to displace again and again, then we know in advance that our efforts at change will be put in check, and our struggle against the authoritative account of gender will be thwarted, and we will submit to an unassailable authority. We're not submitting to jack shit, but... okay, we're going on and on to talk about norms, and here's a whole section about norms and the problems of abstraction. That's literally the subheading. So then we're talking about how discourse might be said to produce a subject, which goes on, basically, any opposition to the norm is already contained within the norm and is crucial to its own functioning. That seems kind of paradoxical to me. Like, the norm is the norm, but it has inside of it the, all the stuff against the norm. It's just making my head hurt. Okay. Here we go. This is a section that could easily become its own video, but it's not going to. Why did I waste the first 14 minutes of this? Okay, so the field of reality produced by gender norms constitutes the background for the surface appearance of gender in its idealized dimensions. So, this is where we get into, on the next page, the question of surgical correction, heavily air quoted there, for intersex children is one case in point. The argument is made that children born with irregular primary sexual characteristics are to be corrected in order to fit in, feel more comfortable, and achieve normality. There's a whole section that I'm going to get into that just, yeah, things that make you go, yeah. Alright. Okay, so, and we're talking about how sexual harassment codes tend to assume that harassment consists of systematic sexual subordination of women at the workplace. And although these regulations seek to constrain sexually demeaning behavior at the workplace, they also carry within them certain tacit norms of gender. Basically, I wrote the side note here, it's like men who are victims of domestic violence or rape, sexual assault, they're not taken as seriously because they're men, because these things are coded in our society as being I don't want to say a woman's problem, but it's something that happens to women, not men. And even women are bad about this. Like, really bad about it. Okay, so... Okay. Lots and lots of notes. Oh! I guess the thing that I really wanted to discuss is actually in next chapter, which is great because that gives you guys something to look forward to. So, okay, but there is one section I want to go through here because it brings in queer theory, which is so fun. I love queer theory. This form of reducing gender to sexuality has thus given way to two separate but overlapping concerns within contemporary queer theory. The first, to separate sexuality from gender, so that to have a gender does not presuppose that one engages in sexual practice in any particular way. And to engage in a given sexual practice does not presuppose that one is a given gender. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. And then second, to argue that gender is not reducible to hierarchical heterosexuality, and that it takes different forms when contextualized by queer sexualities. Indeed, that its binariness cannot be taken for granted outside the heterosexual frame, that gender itself is internally unstable, that transgender lives are evidence of the breakdown of any lines of causal determinism between sexuality and gender. I mean, that's very queer theory. Okay, so... Okay, so then Butler has a beautiful block quote from Catherine Frank. Frank writes, "The problem is far more systematic. By reducing sexism to only that which is done to women by men, we lose sight of the underlying ideology which makes sexism so powerful." Because, you know, we're showing this, and then, yeah. And then, last thing I'm going to leave is an idea from my good buddy Michel Foucault. We don't actually know each other because he's dead. A regulation is that which makes regular. It does not merely constrict and negate, and there is therefore not merely a juridical form of power. Okay. I'm going to we're ending this episode here because that's the end of the chapter. Next time, we're going to talk about Chapter 3, Doing Justice to Someone, Sex Reassignment, and Allegories of Transsexuality. I'll see you guys then. Bye!